All right, let's dive in. Welcome to the deep dive. And today, folks, we're heading straight into the neon-soaked world of Leprechaun 3.
Ah, yeah, this one's a classic.
Now, this film took our mischievous, gold-loving leprechaun and plopped him right into, wait for it, Las Vegas.
Vegas, baby. It's almost too perfect, isn't it?
Seriously. So we're going to unpack why this direct-to-video release earned a cult following, why Warwick Davis himself loves it, and maybe brace ourselves for some seriously creative death scenes.
Definitely some memorable ones in this one.
Oh, yeah. But before we get into all that juicy stuff, for anyone who hasn't seen Leprechaun 3, let's do a super quick plot recap. It all starts, as these things often do, in a pawn shop.
Right. With a mysterious leprechaun statue. Comes with a warning, of course. Don't remove the medallion.
But come on, whoever listens to those warnings?
Yeah, that's the whole point. Of course it gets removed. And bam, our leprechaun, played by the one and only Warwick Davis, is set loose on the strip.
Talk about a bad day in Vegas.
Oh, it gets worse. Enter Scott, just your average college student on vacation. Stumbles across a, you guessed it, gold coin.
Oh no, he didn't wish on it, did he?
Did he ever? And, well, let's just say Scott ends up with a whole lot more than he bargained for.
Poor Scott. He gets hit with a leprechaun curse, right? Sudden craving for gold, the works.
The whole shebang. And get this, he even starts developing an Irish accent.
Oh, come on. That's brutal. So we're talking a full-on transformation here.
Oh, yeah, like something straight out of a monster movie, only with way more four-leaf clovers and pots of gold. It's classic horror, but they play it for laughs, you know?
I love that. So you're laughing even while you're like, dude, don't touch that coin.
Totally. And speaking of things you shouldn't touch, Leprechaun 3 really gets creative when it comes to, shall we say, dispatching its victims.
Right. Those death scenes, I mean, they don't hold back.
Not a bit. Like that one, the slot machine.
Yeah.
Oh, man. It's gruesome, but there's this, like, dark humor to it.
Yeah. It's like, you kind of feel bad for the guy, but at the same time, you're like, well, he was warned. Greed, man.
Yeah, greed will get you every time. And then there's that whole Lady Luck sequence.
Oh, don't even get me started on that one. It's like a cautionary tale about beauty standards gone horribly, hilariously wrong.
It's so over the top, but that's what makes it work. And honestly, it kind of sums up the whole vibe of the movie, doesn't it? Terrifying, funny, and just a little bit messed up.
Totally. And all directed by the one and only Brian Trenchard Smith. I mean, talk about making a splash on a limited budget. How'd he pull it off?
Right. It's a testament to his vision. He took those limitations and turned them into strengths, fast pacing, creative editing. Like he knew how to squeeze every ounce of entertainment out of every scene.
And you can tell everyone on set was having a blast. That energy just jumps off the screen.
Yeah, and that's a big part of why Leprechaun 3 became such a cult classic. It's scrappy, it's fun, and it never takes itself too seriously, which is kind of ironic when you think about it, given where it's set.
Oh, for sure. We're talking about Las Vegas, a city that practically thrives on excess and spectacle.
And that's why it's the perfect playground for our little green menace, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We'll be getting into all that Vegas craziness in just a bit, folks. So hang on tight, because this deep dive is about to get even wilder.
Buckle up.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Now, before the break, we were talking about how director Brian Trenchard Smith really worked wonders with the budget on this film. But let's get to the meat of it, shall we? The setting. I mean, Las Vegas, talk about over the top.
Oh, yeah. Las Vegas is all about excess, isn't it?
Yeah.
Spectacle, instant riches, you name it. It's funny, when you think about it, those themes kind of line up perfectly with the leprechaun himself.
Seriously. They basically took this mythical creature obsessed with gold and dropped him in the one city that's like his natural habitat.
Exactly. It's almost like Vegas was made for this kind of mayhem. And visually, the contrast is amazing. You've got this, what, like 2-foot-tall leprechaun, right? And he's surrounded by these massive casinos, flashing lights, all this extravagance. It's like its own visual language, you know?
I see it. Greed, luck, appearances being deceptive.
All that. And it's not just a pretty backdrop either. Vegas almost becomes a character in the film, egging the leprechaun on.
Well, for sure. Like, fueling his mischief even more.
And think about the symbolism, too. Casinos are built on this whole idea of luck, right? But we all know the house always wins in the end. It's designed to kind of exploit people's desires for money, for that quick win. And the leprechaun, he's like the embodiment of that.
So he's like the dark underbelly of all that glitz and glamour.
Bingo. And that's where the whole horror comedy thing really shines. The film uses humor to point out those darker sides of Vegas, pokes fun at our own desires for wealth and whatnot.
It's like a cautionary tale, but with a lot more slapstick.
Exactly. Las Vegas as a setting, it just lets the filmmakers really play with those themes. You get the scares, the laughs, and it all comes together in this really unique atmosphere. Like, it's familiar, but also kind of unsettling at the same time.
Speaking of unsettling, I think it's time we talk about the main attraction, so to speak.
The Leprechaun himself.
Exactly. I mean, we've touched on Warwick Davis's performance, but how does he make this murderous little fairy so darn entertaining?
Well, he brings this, I don't know, this charm to the role, wouldn't you say? Embraces the leprechaun's mischief, the wordplay.
And those one-liners?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's clearly having a blast playing the character, and that just pulls you in as a viewer. You can't help but smile, even when he's, like, threatening to turn someone into a toadstool or something.
It's amazing. And I gotta say, the physicality of his performance is great, too.
Yeah.
Davis isn't a tall guy, but he really owns the screen.
He does. He's so agile. Those facial expressions, it's all spot on.
Totally agree. He manages to be menacing and hilarious at the same time. Not an easy feat to pull off.
And you know what else adds to the fun? The practical effects. They might look a little dated now, but there's something charming about that old school approach.
Totally. Those transformations, the melting faces, it's also tactile. You can almost feel the work that went into creating those effects.
It gives the film a real authenticity, right? A reminder that you don't need fancy CGI to be effective. Sometimes a little roughness actually adds to the experience.
For sure. It gives the film character a unique texture.
And speaking of texture, we got to mention the soundtrack. It's this blend of creepy synth music and traditional Irish tunes. Fits the tone perfectly.
It's playful, but also kind of menacing.
Right. Like, it's reminding you that even though you're laughing, things could go south real quick.
So from a critic's perspective, where do you think Leprechaun 3 stands among other horror comedies of its time? Did it do anything new, or was it just riding that 90s trend?
Good question. It definitely benefited from the popularity of horror comedy back then, but I think it did stand out.
How so?
Well, for one thing, it really embraced the absurdity of it all. A lot of horror comedies, they try to find that perfect balance between the scares and the laughs. But Leprechaun 3, it just goes all in on the comedy, almost like a parody.
And that's what makes it so rewatchable. You know it's going to be ridiculous, so you can just sit back and enjoy the ride.
Exactly. It's not taking itself too seriously, and honestly, that's refreshing. I think that's a big reason why it's still so popular today. People appreciate that, the honesty of it all.
It's a film that knows what it is and owns it. That's a good lesson for any filmmaker, no matter the genre.
Agreed. Sometimes you just gotta go with your vision, embrace the weirdness, and trust that the audience will follow. And in the case of Leprechaun 3, they definitely did.
It's funny to think, how would the reception have been different if it had been released in theaters instead of going straight to video? Would it have reached that same cult status?
You know, it's a great question. I actually think going straight to video worked in its favor.
Really?
Yeah, it bypassed all the traditional critics and went right to the fans who were already into this kind of over-the-top entertainment.
So it was like a hidden gem, something you had to seek out.
Exactly, and it became this shared experience, like something you watch with your friends late at night.
Part of that whole VHS culture, trading tapes and all that.
Right, and that sense of discovery, being in on something special, I think that's a big part of why Leprechaun 3 is still so beloved. It's like a badge of honor for horror fans.
Which leads us to a bigger question. What is it about these so-called bad movies that resonate with people so much?
That's a tough one. They might not be cinematic masterpieces, but they offer something else, you know?
Like what? Entertainment value.
Sure. They can be funny, cringeworthy, and sometimes you just gotta wonder how they ever got made.
But it's more than just laughing at them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Nostalgia plays a huge role. These films remind us of simpler times, hanging out with friends, watching those cheesy special effects.
And maybe, just maybe, we admire the filmmakers a little too for their, I don't know, audacity. They went for it, even if it wasn't always perfect.
It's true. There's a certain freedom in those films. They're not trying to be anything other than what they are.
It's like they give us permission to let loose, embrace the ridiculousness.
Right. And honestly, in a world that can feel so serious, that's kind of valuable.
Well said. So as we go even deeper into this whole idea of cult classics and bad movies, let's talk about the legacy of Leprechaun 3 specifically. No Oscars, maybe, but it definitely left its mark on the horror comedy genre.
Oh, absolutely. And it all goes back to what we've been saying, right? It embraced the absurd, pushed the boundaries, and just had fun.
It knew its audience and delivered exactly what they wanted. Laughs, scares, and a whole lot of Leprechaun chaos.
And that formula, it worked. Leprechaun 3 led to all those sequels. We're talking space, the hood, even time travel.
They really took the concept and ran with it, huh? Every possible avenue of absurdity.
And that's the power of Leprechaun 3, right? It created a world that was just begging to be explored, a mythology that could be twisted in all sorts of ways.
And it all started with this simple premise, right? A leprechaun loose in Vegas. Who knew it would turn into such a lasting legacy?
It just goes to show sometimes the most unexpected ideas are the ones that take off.
And sometimes, a little absurdity is just what we need.
Couldn't agree more. But as much as we could keep dissecting the brilliance of Leprechaun 3, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
All right, sounds good. But don't worry, folks, we're not done just yet. And we're back for the final round of our Leprechaun 3 deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from the plot to the cultural impact. But let's zoom in on some of those moments, the details that make this film so memorable. Anything in particular that comes to mind for you?
Oh, there are so many. But one scene I always go back to is when the leprechaun first walks into that casino.
Oh, yeah. Just strolls right past security like they don't even see him.
It's perfect. Like they're under some kind of spell. Or maybe they're just so focused on their jobs they don't even register this tiny green guy walking by with a bag of gold.
Classic. It's such a great visual gag.
Totally. Plays on the absurdity, but it also kind of hints at the leprechaun's power, right? He can manipulate people, make them see what he wants.
It's like a taste of the chaos to come.
Oh!
Speaking of which, we got to talk about the limericks.
Oh.
Cheesy, yes, but I kind of love them.
The limericks are iconic. They're the leprechaun's thing, you know? His way of taunting his victims before, well, you know. And Warwick Davis just delivers them with such energy.
Oh, he's clearly loving it.
Yeah.
It's like he's in on the joke, winking at the audience.
Exactly. And that adds so much to the humor. It's what makes Leprechaun 3 more than just a slasher flick, right? It's about the laughs, the sheer fun of it all.
It's a film you watch with friends, maybe some popcorn, have a good time with it.
Exactly. But it's also left a lasting impact, right? It's been almost 30 years since Leprechaun 3 came out, and it still has this huge following. Why do you think that is?
Nostalgia is definitely part of it. It reminds people of a certain time, you know, those late-night movie nights, that whole era of horror comedy that didn't take itself too seriously.
It's just a good time, and I think that's a big part of its appeal. It knows what it is, doesn't try to be anything else. It's not out to win awards. It just wants to entertain.
And it does. It embraces its silliness, the over-the-top stuff, and honestly, that's refreshing. In a world that's so obsessed with being perfect, it's nice to see something a little rough around the edges.
Absolutely. And let's not forget social media. People are constantly sharing Leprechaun 3 stuff online, clips, memes, you name it. It's become part of the culture.
Like a shorthand for a certain type of humor, right?
Totally. A way for horror fans to connect. And that sense of community, that's what keeps these films alive, even decades later.
So as we wrap up our Leprechaun 3 deep dive, what's the one thing you want listeners to take away from this?
You know, I hope they realize that it's okay to enjoy things that aren't high art. Sometimes the most fun you'll have is with a film that embraces being absurd, being imperfect.
And sometimes all you need is a little campy horror, a mischievous leprechaun, and you've got yourself a great movie night. Well, folks, it looks like our time in Vegas has come to an end.
Time to cash out.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Leprechaun 3, and remember, keep exploring those hidden gems of cinema, keep embracing the absurd, and most importantly, keep having fun.